Hello, everyone. Joshua Gilliland here, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Nari Ely, who now is starting to specialize in kaiju with me. And we're here to talk about Godzilla versus Kong. Nari, how you doing?
Doing really good. I have to say that this movie, I think, appropriately realized that the real main characters here are the kaiju. And so I actually don't mind that it didn't spend as much time talking about the plots involving the humans.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on that we can explore a little bit, but allegedly there's 20 to 30 minutes of content that was cut out that would have been human centric.
Oh, I've read about it. There's like a couple throwaway lines by a couple of big actors that I would presume actually had more substantial roles in the uncut version.
Yes, okay, there's Action Dad. There goes Action Dad. Yeah, it's just seriously, that's it. So yeah, that factor aside, did you enjoy the movie?
Yes, I definitely did. The kaiju smash fests were pretty glorious, and I have to admit that I would have been a little upset if Godzilla did not come out clearly on top. And while they made for some good fights, it wasn't just Godzilla stepping on Kong or something like that. It would have been a little unbelievable for me if nuclear powered laser lizard was going to lose to giant. I mean, I know he can use tools, but still to giant gorilla.
Yeah, I would have been fine if Kong won, even though I'm probably sure there was a rights issue with Toho that said that it could not be that clean. But using tools and an axe, I would have been fine with, a chop to the neck, and that was the end. Like that would have made sense. They do a really good job of making Godzilla just a jerk in this. And Kong is very great empathy with the great ape because, again, he's an ape. And the fact, well, apparently he knows sign language. Okay. That is like, okay, I'm on board. Cute kid, knows sign language as well. That's how they communicate. All of that stuff I thought was fine. The issue of the human characters, let's just address that because they have yet to do a movie that's just kaiju centric, like barely any English, just a couple monsters going at it. I don't know what that would be like. That said, my brother made the point of like, why can't they ever do good human characters? To which I asked, have you not seen Heisei Gamera movies? And he's went, no, what's that? It's like, well.
Oh, that is such a good comparison.
Yeah, it's like you can make it work. And there are plenty of Godzilla movies where the humans work out well, such as Monster Zero, with the astronauts and the Lady Beware alarm and all that fun stuff, to, again, the original Godzilla, the tortured Dr. Serizawa. It's like, again, all works out. I mean, the love triangle in the first one's a little weird, but the rest is, fine. So that, I don't agree with the fact that things have to be fast and furious now, of just, we like bright lights that flash and monster smash, because that is an insult to our intelligence. Like, we can handle complex plots. It doesn't have to be Sophie's Choice or Schindler's List, but come on, like, we can, and they can write good characters. That said, there's a lot to discuss with how we get where we are, which is one of the favorite topics that, the true monster in the movie is the billionaire who thinks he can do what he wants. we people can identify with that kind of bad guy. And he decides to go build a MechaGodzilla. I'm curious, What was your reaction on the legality of that?
No. The answer is no. So, you know, I did some research, and there are no, as far as I know, no statutes or regulations that expressly prohibit the building of mechanical kaiju. However, there are a lot of statutes and regulations that govern very stringently, for obvious reasons, the production, ownership, and use of dangerous weapons, dangerous implements, and obviously, what weapons of mass destruction, which actually have a statutory definition. So first of all, while nothing necessarily is going to cover giant mechanical kaiju as written, there are a lot of capabilities that MechaGodzilla demonstrates that I would posit definitely fall within either AFT's jurisdiction, so we're talking about explosives and firearms, or we're talking about a weapon of mass destruction. So I given what the vague pseudoscience there was about like core Earth energy and things like that, I think his proton beam probably has radiation properties, and that alone is enough to put it into the statutory definition. There's a few different categories, and one of them is any weapon of great destructive power that can issue radiation damaging to human life. So I'm pretty sure that's going to fall in the weapon of mass destruction category, even if the giant mechanical lizard itself does not. Although, I would bet that there is a judge somewhere who would find that it's within the spirit of that law.
Yeah.
Especially because it is powered by core energy, which I would assume has radioactive properties.
There's no Second Amendment right to a missile system.
Yeah.
No.
No,
And,
I mean, like, I'm agreeing with you.
No, you don't get that. You don't get to go, but I want the killer robot. In case, the United Nations decides to take over, we need something to fight the Black Hawk helicopters coming in. It's like, no, you don't. No, that's not, you don't get to build, the 70-story attack kaiju with missiles and robo punch. And yeah, you don't get to build one of those.
I will add that, obviously the law governing this doesn't mean that no one except government workers or military personnel can make or use or maintain these kinds of weapons or weapon systems. It should be relatively non-controversial to say that there are a lot of private contractors, for example, that do this kind of work. There are explosive experts that are in the private sector that, they're. The key thing here is, though, that they are licensed or expressly authorized under statute and regulation to use or maintain or build these kinds of destructive devices. And there's very complex licensing schemes that I've only scratched the surface on, just enough to tell you that they are very stringent and very complex. So yes, woe to the person who decides as a science project they are going to build something with a nuclear core.
It would be like an oil company building its own attack submarine to go around and sink other ships. It's like, no, that's crossed the line into piracy. And we don't want multinational corporations acting as nation states.
For sure.
And that's what this company has done. Apex is turned into nation state type behavior with what they're doing.
I wanted to add also that it's possible that the Ghidorah bones that are being used in this, given what we know about Ghidorah from the previous movie, there's an argument there that this also falls into bioweapon territory, but anyway.
Good catch. And apparently the book got into this. Did not read the book because reading the novelization of this is not something I have free time for. But I'm sure it's delightful. But apparently the, Jonah and his henchmen, they were like growing new Ghidorah heads to sell on the black market because there had to be two. And there was only Kevin's severed head left. So again, like a little plot hole to think about of like, wait a minute, there was only one. So if they've been growing new heads and then selling them and then doing an acid dip to get all the flesh off of it. That's just uh, a lot that you need to talk about. So that you can't just have a throwaway line. I would have preferred not having Kevin's head in this film, but that's just me from a storytelling perspective. But they did want to connect some dots, I guess, and then just to paint over other ones. It was actually it was like the CEO or it was, one of the top guys from Legendary, had some quote about, well, we did analysis and we found that people really do like, the monster punching. It's like, yeah.
You did a study for that?
You were never 7? Well,
also, again, I think he didn't watch any Gamera.
No, clearly not. There's, or any of the other good monster movies. And if your sample set is Fast and the Furious, of like, well, this works for that franchise, it should work for all of them. Bright lights, loud noises, and just people grimacing. Sure. I just, for the record, I hate those movies, and they're not the future of cinema. So
I will just say I haven't seen a single Fast and Furious movie.
Neither have I. So just the clips, it's like.
Although I love Dwayne The Rock Johnson. If you are watching this, I love you.
He does seem super cool. And yeah, where my mother lived in Houston, she lived next door, 2 houses down from The Rock's mom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he bought a house for his mom. Because again, he's a good human being. So,
yeah.
Yeah. No, he's delightful. I'm glad he's doing well.
But I have not watched a Fast and Furious movie.
Hire people who know how to write and don't think the audience is stupid. So like that's the moral with this film.
But nonetheless, because we have kaiju, there are still plenty of legal issues that we can discuss.
Yeah, so while we're on the topic of MechaGodzilla, let's get into export control licensing. Now there's a hat tip to one of our favorite billionaires, Elon Musk, wanting to build a hyperloop, which would be a tube underground that could get from San Francisco to LA in like 7 minutes or something insane. It would go wicked fast, and there we go. Now with that, we have a hyperloop in this movie. At least it sure looks like a hyperloop from what Elon has put forward. To go from Pensacola, Florida to Hong Kong is over 8,500 miles. To send weapon systems from the United States to China raises all kinds of red flags. And I don't just mean the Chinese one, because we have something called export control licensing. And we used to, it used to be controlled by the State Department. And because during the Clinton years, Bernie Schwartz donated lots of money to Bill Clinton's campaign. Schwartz was the CEO of Loral Space Systems, which at the time was launching satellites from China. And one had a problem at liftoff and crashed into a village. Lots of people died. So Schwartz had access to President Clinton, and in a White House visit expressed, hey, we need to change the export control licensing so we can make it so that the Chinese missiles don't go off course. Export control licensing went from the Defense Department and state to Department of Commerce. That, again, that was a poster child for campaign finance law reform that McCain ran on in 2000. So, because it got relaxed and the Department of Commerce isn't as concerned about improving the accuracy of Chinese ICBMs as the State Department and the Department of Defense are rightly concerned about, Schwartz got his wish and the Chinese military got new technology thanks to Bernie. So their missiles are more accurate because of that. So that's a nice big exhibit on why we have export control licensing and why we don't repeat that anymore, because we should have learned from, wow, we made the Chinese missiles better at killing
That's so bad.
Americans. And again, but let's talk about the good old days of Bill Clinton.
Oh, gee.
Or not. So anyway, 90s were a different time politically. To have those issues. So what then happens in this film is we just see an express train going over 8,000 miles to the other half of the planet with missiles and a death ray and a giant killer robot to be
the most advanced military technology, presumably, that currently is being made in the United States in this movie world.
Just being shipped over to China for Chinese nationals to be using to put together, despite the fact Apex is the one calling the shots. I'm like, it's the entire reason why we have export control licensing, is so we don't improve the military of other countries. Your reaction?
I was just going to add to that. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different laws that very strictly govern to whom and what the United States will send in terms of technology and equipment with military applications. And one of them is also not just, this a relatively simple analysis of is this country an ally, is this country an adversary. There's also an analysis of neighboring countries, so countries that they might have for lack of a better term, maybe a military relationship with, in the sense that there's a power relationship there between them and perhaps neighboring or regional countries. And so we do analyze also, what kind of quantitative or qualitative effect giving a certain piece of technology or equipment is going to have to other countries in that area that we maybe have relationships with. And in the case of, sending our most advanced military technology on it, literally an express train to Hong Kong, which at this point in time would have been after the handover. So we are talking about the PRC as opposed to Hong Kong when it was under British formal control. You would have to be analyzing what kind of qualitative effect will that have on the military edge of Japan, Korea, India, all of which we have much closer ties with. So even if you don't agree with the premise that we have an adversarial relationship with China, it's difficult to assert that we have a friendlier relationship than Japan, Korea, or India, just to name some examples.
Yeah, they would be upset. Like, we don't want to start a kaiju weapons.
So the Taiwanese ambassador would be camped out in front of the White House. That's all I'm gonna say.
What were you thinking? Like, dude. And the president would be like going, what? I mean, there would be congressional hearings with the employees of Apex, and the board of directors being drugged in front of Congress to go, what did you do? What did you do right now? Tell me. And yes, I am mad at you. No. So again, this does a nice job of making big tech and corrupt billionaires the villain.
That's a tale as old as time. Also, all I'll say about that.
Seen it before. I've seen it this week. Yeah, good times. Speaking of the Hyperloop, you can't just tunnel under cities without doing a whole lot of permitting. And
what is the route exactly of this? Like, presumably some of it's through ocean, but some of it has to be over land, right?
Under. So
yeah, that's what I meant. Like, there's an entire continent, at least part of Africa has to be in the way, or are they going the other direction? Like, which way is it going?
Yeah, are they going across the Atlantic, or are they going across the Pacific? There was a mention about New Mexico, so I think it'd be through the continental.
West. Oh, okay.
So you have oh, 33 stories down, which again is a reference to Kong 1933. And you
Oh,
have,
that's nice.
yeah, you can't just like tunnel under New Mexico and New Mexico won't have a problem with it. Because if part of Albuquerque sinks, you know, if
Or
back,
if there's an explosion in the tunnel, or
let's just say Albuquerque sinks an inch, that means houses are going to crack all over. You're going to sloping backyards. Like it's going to be a mess. And that's just from a little,
yeah.
a little property damage. That's still going, when you multiply it across all the houses, it's not construction defect litigation, but it's similar to it because you've now degraded soil support for houses. So,
And there's also acquiring the property rights, which often is a problem. You're going to have to negotiate with multiple state and municipal governments to try to get the permission to do so. There's a reason why we have a dearth of these kinds of trans, just even county line, but definitely trans state line public, like high speed public transportation. One of the big reasons, I'm not suggesting it's the only reason, but one of the big reasons is that when you're going across multiple political jurisdictions, it gets really hard to get everyone to agree to it.
yeah, it's like why the Bay Area Rapid Transit BART doesn't go all the way around the Bay Area, because at the time, San Mateo County said this is going to be the most corrupt political organization ever, and we won't be a part of it. And Santa Clara County, I think, said something similar, not positive, but they opted out as well. So it doesn't go all the way around, which would have been super convenient. I mean, or the fact that we have the, high-speed train to nowhere in California. Like I voted on that because it's like, hey, okay, this sounds like a good idea. It sounds like a good thing. And then when it turned into, here's all the eminent domain issues that are going to happen, and all the folks saying like, not in my backyard. I like my house in the Bay Area. Screw you. That's when it turned into the train to nowhere. And 18 years later, still really hasn't even started. So again, it's a mess.
And we're just talking about there are a couple county lines, right? A couple different county governments. So here we're talking about building a hyperloop underneath, I don't know how many counties there are in Texas and New Mexico that this would cut through, but obviously we're talking about dozens of counties. We're talking about multiple states. That in and of itself would be a titanic achievement.
And it's not all solid rock to go through. You like when there's a reason why LA doesn't have a subway, because it's molten asphalt below the surface. I mean, the tar pits are there for a reason. And so it's like when they do construction in LA, it's like, oh wow, we're digging through, old magma or tar at this point. It's like, oh look, a woolly mammoth skeleton. Call the La Brea tar pit so they can come excavate it from here and we can finish the parking garage then. Again, 33 stories down, over half the earth. And we have things like earthquakes. So again, what's going to happen with that?
For the fossils, I was just going to suggest that if it's Apex building this again, I think they're probably just not reporting when they find fossils. I'm just going to suggest that.
I don't know if they're going through them or if they're just making donations to museums. Surprise! Look what we found, and we're not telling you where. It's just not good. I mean, clearly, this is an example of a company without corporate counsel. Or if they are, they're like tied up and gagged in a corner.
Oh, yes, yes.
Where's the lawyer? We keep him gagged and in the closet over there. He keeps telling us no, but this way his family gets a paycheck and we just keep him locked up. Like that would, no lawyer in their right mind would say like, yeah, go for it. Lawyers there are corporate lawyers whose mission in life is to figure out how to get something done. And then there are the lawyers whose mission in life is to say, are you nuts? Like, we can't do that. And clearly, I do think their lawyer would have been bound and gagged. That's just my,
Yeah.
yeah, just
Yeah,
lawyers.
good. Yeah, this should be said for the non-lawyers out there. I think that, which is probably a majority of our audience, that in-house counsel or corporate counsel are not just there to find ways around the law or try to cover up breaking the law. A good corporate counsel, and all of the corporate counsel that I've ever met, are focused on telling a company's executives how to stay within the law, advising them on how to follow the law. So in this case, yes, I think their corporate counsel, if they are, if they are an averagely ethical lawyer, are in fact bound and gagged somewhere.
Yeah, nope, and God knows what that paycheck was that they were getting each month, but I hope it was worth it.
I mean, if they're bound and gagged in a closet all the time, aren't they billing 24/7? Anyway.
But intravenously, yeah, that's food shoved under the door. Yeah, I'm sure it's a
Too dark, too dark.
I'm sure it's a delightful career choice. Well, let's get to the other issue, and it shows that Apex is a real stupid company, or the writers have no concept of how corporations actually work. Because I'm cool with a giant Godzilla, the giant Kong. I'm cool with, they're able to build a MechaGodzilla. What's not realistic is a multinational corporation not having any form of information security. And the idea that you would have an employee having a podcast and a website and they don't know about it, that's a bridge too far for me, because part of the legal department would be doing, like, having Google alerts going off whenever the company is discussed. You have social media that tracks references and hashtags and all mentions of the company. That's what marketing does. It's what information security does. And it can fall into different realms of it. But the idea that you have somebody with a conspiracy website who is an employee and they don't know about it, bonkers. Absolutely bonkers.
Especially a company in which its whole premise is that it's developing highly secretive technology, methods, techniques, things like that. I would be a little less surprised if this were like a car insurance company and their business is not sort of premised around patents or company secrets or other types of intellectual stuff that they're trying to keep secret. If this company seems that their whole shtick is basically intellectual property and manufacturing from intellectual property, this seems a little, I agree, it's particularly dubious.
It's not like he had a free Angel Fire website where he was posting stuff. It was his domain name, which means that's registered. So you can look up who registered it. You can look up, you can, track where it's being streamed from.
Oh, I actually have a tiny bit of experience with this. There is a spam texter who has been texting me for years, and I have toyed around with the idea of one of these days filing a lawsuit in the local state court or local district court to bring them in, because there are statutory violations for that. But anyway, I have done this is just me as an individual with no resources, no law enforcement help, have just use the internet to figure out who owns the domains, because they send me little links, which I never click on for obvious reasons, and just figure out who owns these domains that they keep sending me. And it's the same entity in Panama. Now, granted, the actual identity of that entity is kept anonymous by the domain seller or the domain manager, but you can subpoena that. And so again, if Apex has a general counsel, the fact that assume that Mr. Bernie Hayes has done the basic bit of protection to anonymize the ownership of his domain on GoDaddy or whatever domain manager he's using. That does not protect you from a court-issued subpoena, or does not protect the domain holder or manager from a court-issued subpoena, demanding the identity of the person who owns, or the entity that owns that domain. So it would have been the easiest thing in the world for them to figure that out.
It's just, that's malpractice. I mean, to go, we have an employee with a podcast disseminating things that should be violating their NDA, and none of us know who he is or even are remotely aware of it. Bonkers. Again, like registering their podcast on Apple Podcast would require that basic information. So the idea that it's anonymous is just crazy. Yeah. So
But
again,
Josh, if they actually had figured out who it was, does Mr. Hayes have anything to protect him from Apex kicking his ass out on the street?
no.
Yeah.
It's just, this is not, I mean, this is not like the classic whistleblower, situation. I mean, it's, sure, he has a First Amendment right to say what he wants to say. However, if the person you work for is upset at you for disclosing company secrets, they will fire you. Like, there isn't, the whistleblower laws are normally like government action. And this is a multinational corporation, not the US government. So
yes.
Problem
so yes, yeah, the first step in the question is like, what source of protection are you talking about? If we're talking about basic First Amendment protection, the first element for does the First Amendment apply is simply, is it government action that we're trying to protect against? This is a common misconception that gets bandied about quite a bit, especially because it's a very topical issue about censorship on social media and all of these things. And while I think there's a good hearty debate that you can have over what speech and censorship on social media should look like, the First Amendment does not play into it as our social media currently exists, because as long as it's owned by a private entity, or in this case, Mr. Hayes is employed by a private company, the First Amendment just doesn't factor in. If he were a government employee, there are First Amendment protections. It's much more limited. You would have to be doing it on your own time and things like that. And there's a lot of limitations on it as well, but still, we're talking about government action. So First Amendment, I'm really sorry, Mr. Hayes, the First Amendment is not gonna stop Apex from firing you. And that's also what we're talking about here, is firing. If we're talking about, because Apex doesn't seem like the most upstanding organization. If we're talking about them like sending thugs to go beat them up or something, now we're in a totally different zone. I'm just talking about if they decided to take employment action against him, such as firing or demotion or whatever. So the second one is, as you mentioned, Josh, the other source of protection that you could have is some kind of statute, so a law that protects whistleblowing. Now, ordinarily, what we're talking about with whistleblowing is government employees who are blowing the whistle on stuff that their employer, the government, is doing. And those are the most robust protections. So if you're a federal employee, if you're a state or city employee, there are almost certainly very robust whistleblower statutes that will protect disclosures that you make about, government malfeasance, maladministration, corruption, anything like that. Again, though, if instead, like Mr. Hayes, you are an employee of a private company, typically your protections are much more limited. And so, yeah, I pulled up the statutes for California, and California has relatively robust protections for whistleblowers in private companies compared to other states. So this is at least average, probably above average protections if you're a private employee for disclosures that you're going to make. But it's still limited, and it's limited to particular types of disclosures, and it's limited to disclosures to particular types of people or parties. So on the first hand, it has to be disclosures of stuff that are essentially violations of law. There's also some stuff about like unsafe work environments or things like that, but typically what we're talking about is you are making a disclosure about your employer violating the law or a regulation. So that's number one. Now, I think some of the stuff that Mr. Hayes is reporting on probably fits that bill. So I'm just going to assume that fits. especially because of all the stuff that we talked about at the top of the podcast about how I just don't see how what Apex is doing, like any of it is, there's so many illegalities about what their operation is.
It reminds me of all the different, whistleblower type stories out there. And frequently they're government action. Blue Thunder, great example of a whistleblower story. Serenity, also whistleblower story. But I'm thinking the thing that we could compare him the most to would probably be like Silkwood. Because of like, hey, this bad thing's happening and they're trying to silence me. Except in his case, they're not even aware of his existence.
No, oh, you're right. So I am assuming here that they have figured it out and have taken some kind of employment action, probably fired him.
Yeah, and with that, it's also, while we're on the First Amendment, it's important to discuss or to note what is a traditional public forum, because that's what's protected. So if he was just sounding like his normal crazy self, wanting to douse himself with bleach, which again, seems weird. And he was on, if he was walking around the courthouse steps outside or a public park on his little soapbox, just ranting about all the horror of Apex, that'd be protected. Like that's the sort of thing that's a traditional public forum, minus time, place, and manner type restrictions. Like you can't just walk down the middle of the street with a picket sign because you're in the middle of the street. Like you have to get.
Oh yeah, if we're assuming that the government is taking action against him because he's saying the tap water is full of mind controlling drugs, or you have to douse yourself in bleach, and all of those seem like things that various government agencies might want to squelch. Yeah, I definitely see what you're talking about.
But a private company wanting to fire him, yeah, that's totally within their right. Because you should be loyal to the company that you're working for, even if it's work for hire. And it's just,
it's more that the company has a right to have employees who are loyal or who they like. This is something, so I actually worked in employment law for a while, and it's a common misconception that employment laws in the United States make for fair or pleasant employment environments, and that is definitely not always true. There are certain types of unfairness that by statute we have decided are off limits, and that's things like racial discrimination, religious discrimination, discrimination based on disability, all kinds of things that we do prohibit by law. But when it comes to a company or a boss deciding to promote someone because they like them, to demote someone because they think they're disloyal, or to fire someone because they said something embarrassing about the company, that's, generally all within their prerogative. Oh, so I wanted to just finish the discussion about the whistleblower laws. So with California's, and if anyone is curious out there, I'm talking about California Labor Code section 1102.5. So it protects certain types of disclosures, which, like I said, is generally your employer's breaking the law, but it also only protects disclosures of that nature to particular parties, and specifically it's to law enforcement or government. So if Mr. Hayes had gone to the police with his allegations of unlawful conduct by Apex, he would have a claim under California law for damages, for back pay, for reinstatement, if Apex had then fired him. If he had testified in a court of law truthfully, he would have, and they fired him, he would have a claim potentially against them for that. And if he were called in front of a congressional hearing, because as you suggested, Josh, they might get called in front of some very angry senators or congresspeople, and he testified truthfully and embarrassed or exposed companies' secrets of some sort, he would have a potential claim under the whistleblower protection for California citizens. So it's very limited for people who are employed by private organizations. So if you, like most Americans, are employed by a private entity, be very careful about what kinds of things you are protected against if you want to go disclosing things. And in this case, just airing it to the public on a podcast, going to a newspaper, is not going to fit statutory protections for Mr. Hayes.
No. They could have had so many other plot options, but no. And then you get him running around with a couple of minors on whether or not that's child endangerment. So there's that of and you know, you got to feel bad for Mark Russell because his daughter seems to have inherited his ex-wife's crazy gene, and that's, you know, as he enters the teenage years, that girl is going to be wildly dangerous. So yeah, good times, magic moments. So if your house gets crushed by, say, Godzilla breathing radioactive heat ray or stepped on, you're going to want to go sue someone. Sure, you might fill out the insurance paperwork, but if for the people of Pensacola, Florida, you know, here's an actual act of Godzilla that they probably should, you know, seek legal representation over, because Godzilla came to shore and went on a rampage because of what was being built at Apex. It's time to sue Apex. Now, Nari, have you worked on any class actions in your?
Actually have. I've done a couple, I've worked on a couple class actions, both on the defense and the plaintiff side. In, you know, in any class action, first of all, what you need is a cause of action, right? For just an individual plaintiff. So I think that's the first place to start here, because while there's obviously damage that has been caused, there's obviously injuries that have been caused. You know, you have to think as a lawyer, what kind of, you know, legal action, if any, is there from this? What kind of redress can we get for these people? You know, I think the thing that presents itself most obviously here is just classic negligence tort. So setting aside what we already talked about, which is that there are lots of violations of law and regulation that Apex is undoubtedly engaged in here, and probably unsafe working environment. But when it comes to the people surrounding this facility, right? So not Apex employees, but people just happen to live near this facility or have a business near this facility or be driving near this facility. I think what we're talking about is a negligence tort action. Do you agree?
Yes, that's where I would start. If, you know, again, if a radioactive monster that's millions of years old took out my house, yeah, I'm thinking that's a good place to start, because it's the most logical. There could be, you know, statutory violations as well that you could have a private right to action over, but negligence seems to,
Yeah.
if not an ultra hazardous activity.
Yes, so that's, you are preempting my list of topics here, Josh, but yes, that is a very good instinct. So just to quickly run through, the basic 4 elements of a negligence tort are, first, that the defendant owed your client or your plaintiff, in this case, some kind of duty of reasonable care. So in this case, we're talking about some kind of duty of reasonable care that Apex had to you know, maintain these kinds of materials that may attract kaiju, or to, you know, guard against a potential kaiju attack, something along those lines, that the defendant breached that duty of care. So again, assuming there's some kind of standard of care that we're talking about, that Apex didn't follow it, that there was a plaintiff who suffered an injury, and in this case, I think that's obvious. But then the 4th one, which is again the slightly dodgy one, or harder one, I should say, is whether or not Apex's breach of some duty of care is what caused that injury. Now, there are some interesting questions in there. The first is, you know, what would the duty of reasonable care look like if you were experimenting on or building things with King Ghidorah parts? It's an honest question, Josh. Like, I just don't, this is why I think your instinct about ultra hazardous activities or materials might be right. I'm just not sure that there is really a reasonable duty of care, because it's just so dangerous.
Yeah, this is beyond blowing up a tree stump with dynamite. Like, we've now crossed into, we're playing with alien corpses of a monster that was terraforming the planet and going to
and
cause
kicking Godzilla's butt for a little bit.
Yeah, that was going to start an extinction level event of humanity. So no, that just seems, it's like juggling plutonium. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And It's like, whoa, no one can live in the neighborhood for 50,000 years. Good job, Bob. Just no, it's radically insane. I'm like, it's one thing to do the weapons development. It's
Like
another.
building the mechanical aspects itself, or a missile launcher for MechaGodzilla.
Yeah,
Those are still, we still have problems with that, as we discussed before, but it's not necessarily perhaps this kind of ultra hazardous activity.
Yeah, and even then, I haven't researched this, but designing weapon systems of that magnitude, and there would have to be zoning laws for that, because like we don't do, there's a reason why where we do weapons tests are in places like New Mexico and Nevada. Like we don't.
Arizona, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
like
originally from Arizona. There's lots of desert out there that's perfect for it.
Yeah, Area 51 is in a remote place for a reason. We don't set off nuclear weapons near playgrounds. Like we don't do
At
that.
least not anymore. No, sorry.
There was some unpleasantness with Project Crossroads, but yeah, we just don't do that. So if Apex was building something that they knew was not allowed where their facility was, that could get problematic fast for them and could be a reason for a lawsuit to go like, you knowingly did this. And you,
so if we're in the world of intentional tort, that's a different world. I did want to just circle back to the thing that you mentioned before, and for anyone who isn't familiar with a strict liability tort, Josh referenced dynamite because there's an exception to the 4 elements that I just mentioned, a well-known exception, which is an ultra hazardous activity. So in the classic example is handling dynamite. It's just something that we consider to be so abnormally dangerous that you no longer need to prove most of the elements of your negligence tort. You don't need to show that they handled it negligently. You just need to show that they had the dynamite and that they caused your injury. That's what's called a strict liability tort. So in this case, I agree with you, Josh. I think that we are so far outside of the realm of normal human activities that we analyze through this negligence standard, that I think all you have to do is show that they had this, either that they had Ghidorah parts, or that they had a nuclear core for this thing, or that they had, like you're saying, these other types of weaponry that are still considered to be extremely dangerous. And we're sitting next to either a residence or a commercial space or anything except for a weapons testing ground.
Yeah, it's like, this is our corporate headquarters where we have a secret nuclear reactor. It's like, what? Like, this is, no, like there's the school, there's like, we don't do that. And so, yeah, bad mojo all the way around. But hey, it's a Hollywood popcorn movie. We can just gloss right over that. So, because everyone...
I just wanted to mention, just in passing, as we conclude that topic, before moving on to whether or not this would be a class action, is just that, this comes up a lot in kaiju movies in general as to whether or not there's a problem with causation, because kaiju, especially in the classic Toho movies, are definitely metaphors for forces of nature or Earth or things like that. And there can be a break in causation where what we're talking about is an act of God, is what it's been called in the common law, or more modernly, perhaps an act of nature. And it's an unforeseeable, unpreventable thing, like a tornado appearing or something like that. But I will just mention in passing that in the universe of the Godzilla world right now, which is at least a couple movies in the new Godzilla universe, it's been well known for a while that there are kaiju and that they can attack things. It is even known that Godzilla is drawn to Ghidorah stuff because it's his mortal enemy. The key word here is foreseeability. So acts of God have to be unforeseeable. In this case, even if Godzilla usually can be considered an act of God, it is very foreseeable that he's going to show up if there's a piece of Ghidorah that's hanging out being experimented on or built into a weapon.
That, or the fact that he's the king of the monsters who likes to go out and challenge things. Building something at a place named Apex, which again is just giving Godzilla the middle finger, saying, come at me, bro. and they're surprised he comes ashore angry. So again, that just seems crazy talk for them. The lawyer was bound and gagged, and that's why Pensacola gets beat the hell.
To quickly go through, so I'm just going to quickly run through what it takes to put together a class action. So what we've just talked about is what you would do if you're an individual plaintiff bringing an action, right? Class actions are an exception to the usual rule in our court system, which is that normally you have distinct party A, distinct party B. So much from A to B. Class actions are an exception to that rule where we allow for collective actions by a large group of people against one or more defendants. There's a number of requirements. I won't just bore you guys by going through all of them, but some of the most important ones are, number one, it has to be a large enough group of plaintiffs. There isn't, as far as I can tell from my research on this, there isn't like a specific number that has been held out as if you're above this number, you're golden. But typically what we're talking about is dozens or more. And the reason for that is if you have, 20 plaintiffs, you can probably just join them together as opposed to doing a class action. The other one is they all have to have the same legal issues common to each other, which is known as commonality this would be Federal Rule 23 governing certifying class actions. And in this case, I think that's pretty obviously well covered. The legal questions that are in common to them are the stuff that we just talked about, Josh, right? Like, is this a strict liability? Was Apex, if it's not, was Apex negligent in its duty of care towards these people who live nearby? All of those are going to be in common. I don't see a problem with that. It also seems to be a pretty easy to define class. So that's the other thing, is how easy is it to define the class and ascertain who's in it? And that doesn't seem too hard. In this case, it would be anyone who either was injured, died, and or had their property damaged by Godzilla on a specific date in Pensacola, Florida. Like that's not too hard. That's a pretty well-defined class. Then there's some rules governing the adequacy of the individual plaintiffs representing the class, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to bore people with the details, because in this case, I do think it's a pretty obvious answer that you could get a class action together for this.
Yeah, there's numerosity, there's a commonality of the cause of action.
Which predominates over in other things, yes.
Yeah, we meet all the elements. I do want to highlight some fun facts that from this movie.
Fun? Are they really fun, Josh?
No. So way of comparison, we lost under 3,000 sailors at Pearl Harbor. Godzilla takes out a large fleet in this movie. We would not forgive him because there are a lot of dead sailors. So the crew of a destroyer is around 300. The crew size of an aircraft carrier is 6,000. We see a Iowa-class battleship in this. Now, we only made 4 of those, and 3 of them are museum ships, and the 4th is preserved on the inside so it could be put back into service. And that's the USS Wisconsin in Norfolk, Virginia. You can only do deck tours, and they have a nice museum by the ship, so you can walk around the deck. So in this universe, we clearly put the Wisconsin back into service. And in the 1980s, the crew complement of that ship was around 1,800. In World War II, it was over 2,000, more like around 3,000. But again, that was World War II. So we see Godzilla take out a Nimitz-class carrier, which has a crew of 6,000. 2 destroyers get hit with the Godzilla's tail, so there's at least 600 sailors killed. And we see the Wisconsin get cut in 2. Now, if all the watertight doors had been sealed, that ship could have survived. I don't know if they could put it back together easily, but at least the guys might have survived it, or they all died horribly, one or the other. So we're looking at a death toll of around 8,400 sailors which is the most that we've never lost that many in a single battle before. We would not be okay with Godzilla at that point in time. We would want to kill Godzilla because we're not going to forget that and just go like, whoops a daisy. Especially losing a destroyer would probably put us over the edge. Taking out an aircraft carrier. Now, granted, it looked cool seeing, Kong do his John McClane move off of it. But that said, it's still 6,000 sailors getting nuked.
Yeah.
And so it's like that scene has such a giant death toll. It bothered me. It's like, wow, that's pretty extreme,
Yeah.
even for a kaiju movie. So
I think it's a really good thing that you pointed that out, Josh, especially because, again, I think people who, unlike you, are not experts on the capabilities and accompaniments of naval ships may not understand. So aircraft carriers are commonly called floating cities because they really are like, there's a lot of people. They're almost entirely self-sufficient. They literally have their own law enforcement because it's so many people that are there for so long. It's not just a really cool ship, a really cool piece of material that's getting destroyed. There's a lot of people there. We have not yet, if we ever do, gotten to the point that we can have that kind of massive military piece of equipment being manned by 20 guys. That's just not what we're talking about.
No, unlike the Ford class carriers, which are the new ones coming out that take, years to build, that's still about the same complement. So yeah, it's just Godzilla kills 6,000 sailors in one scene. It's like, okay, and it was also the aircraft carriers that, beat Japan. Like that was the deciding force on how we won World War II, besides the atomic bombs to finish the job. So yeah, like it's a super disturbing scene with that. That said, and the problems with the story, or the fact that there's a character named Josh who's completely useless, I took deeply offensive myself. It's like, loser. I mean, like you used whiskey to stop the computer. Really? That was the plan? Okay. Like, yeah, and the cute girl just using you for your van, which again, my dad told me stories about having a van in the 70s. Most fathers freak out if their daughter's hanging out with a guy with a van. We don't
Yeah.
need to go into detail why.
No, please don't.
No. Yeah, if the van has a waterbed, that's a bad sign. So, but that was back in the 70s when people did that. So all bad mojo. That said, the fights in this, actual Godzilla versus Kong in Hong Kong is exceptional. I mean, it's everything kaiju fans have wanted. And the tag team of Godzilla and Kong versus MechaGodzilla is pure beauty. It's like the dream come true for kaiju fans when you have the two classic monsters beat the hell out of something together, and it's Kong finishing it off and holding its severed head. It's like, wow, dreams do come true. So
I wanted to add to that. So I lived in Hong Kong. I'm trying to remember exactly which year. For one semester of my college years, that would have been like 2012, something like that. Maybe 2011, I think. And the skyline and the harbor side of the city, especially on the Kowloon side, is extremely gorgeous. It's iconic. And I think it's a really memorable, remarkable scene for that fight. I do have to say that, of course, it's a little sad because of what's been going on in Hong Kong in the last couple of years. Although this was shot, my understanding is in 2018 for the most part, which is a little bit before things have gotten very, very different. Let's just say there, but the city itself has some remarkable architecture. It's incredibly beautiful. There's something that was called the Hong Kong double take, which is that buildings went up so fast in that city that and down, that a landmark that you had been relying on to find your way around downtown Kowloon or Hong Kong would just disappear, after a single day, and you'd have to do a double take because you'd realize, wait, where did that skyscraper go? So yeah, I think it's a really, really lovely piece of CGI and cinematography.
Yeah, it's glorious, and the Hollow Earth is, I mean, that was breathtaking. And seeing, Kong just zipping around, it's like, that's still a giant place. There could be more Kongs hanging out down there, and he doesn't have to be alone anymore. Plus, like if they do a movie just down there, that would rock. Like that could be the way that you have Kong. It could almost be like a nature film or a silent movie of like following, Kong as the protagonist on some adventure. So again, there's some very fun things that they could do. And there's a large catalog of kaiju that they can either lean into or make up and just rock out. So again, it was a fun film, despite the horrific problems with it.
The notable shortcomings.
Apparently there was stuff with Monarch that just got cut out entirely.
That's the last thing I forgot to mention. So I know I was slightly alone in this in our previous podcast about the previous movie with King Ghidorah. I don't understand how Monarch is still in business. They were so woefully negligent at securing the kaiju sites in the last movie. How are they not out of business? But anyway.
There's that, but it's like this weird Scooby-Doo element of, you get Team Kong, which is Madison, Josh, and Bernie. Oh, excuse me, that's Team Godzilla. And then Team Kong is those who were on, was it Dr. Lind? I'm blanking on Skarsgård's character name.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember either.
It's just, they had too many human characters. Like if they had just narrowed it down, so it was, if they just did 2 teams instead of 4, because you have human bad guys and then 3 sets of human good guys. And that just got messy fast. If they needed to trim that down, because you need the villain. You absolutely have to have the villain if you're making a MechaGodzilla. So yeah, you don't always need a human bad guy. Like you can do a movie without that, but the fact that they wanted MechaGodzilla and it was man-made, there had to be a villain. So that's one. And then you have to figure out, okay, is it Team Kong or Team Godzilla? Like or do we start with both and then they split off and come back together? So again, you Scooby-Doo elements of, these characters, Scooby and Shaggy go this way, and Velma and go this way, and then they come back together. Like that would have worked. But this was, to go 8,000 miles in like 12 hours, you have to be going like around Mach 1. So again, it's just like, don't make a movie like this because it's just, the math doesn't work. Or,
Also, sorry, the gravitic conversion thing, but anyway.
Well, that is just, how do you get a core sample of this power source and then you like 3D print it on the surface? What? Like that?
Yeah, all I needed was the resonance signature or something like that.
It's just, because it's like, well, let's just shortcut it so we don't have to get it to the surface to power up MechaGodzilla. Yeah. That way we can kill off the characters, the evil lady back quickly. And it's like, that's not, like, we don't drill for oil. Or it's like, oh, look, we found a sample of gold. We now can make it. It's like, so we're alchemy now? Like this, it's like alchemy was the answer.
Oh, so they've at least solved the dependence on fossil fuels. That's clear then, if they have alchemy.
It is so, all of that's infuriating. So like this movie, it's, out of all of them, Skull Island's my favorite because it has the best plot and keeping it like narrow in focus. You know, like it takes place on Skull Island. It's about surviving the island.
Mhm.
It works. 2014 Godzilla is just all over the map. And even though that's probably the most like a true kaiju film, when
Yeah.
getting into the history of kaiju movies, but still it kind of fizzled and you still have a massive death toll. Or you have a known attack that's going to happen in Las Vegas and nobody leaves. King of the Monsters, I loved it. And to be fair, that probably had the most thoughtful human plots, even though there were problems with it. But you actually see the bad guys try to have a plot and the good guys try to have a plot. And there's problems, but again, it's global in scope. And then we get
And
this.
Mothra was in it, so I can't complain too much.
You know, the King of the Monsters and Godzilla versus Kong have excellent fights. The fights are brilliant for the final act in both of these films. And it's, I mean, like, and this is our second time seeing Kong.
Mm-hmm.
And Kong works well as a lead character because you get more emoting and
communication, like actual, yeah, actual communication.
it's like no one's riding on Godzilla's shoulder because like that just doesn't make sense from any Godzilla films in the past. You know, he doesn't have a connection with humanity, or if he does, it's like attenuated. Like there's in Ghidorah, the military accidentally like hits him, and you see him like turn and look over, like, come on, guys, like, and goes back to the fight.
Yeah.
But this, I'm curious to see where they go. I would love to see Kong on the Hollow Earth being Kong, and just have it be him monkeying around. That would bring me great joy. So, thoughts from you?
I'm also curious to see where it goes. I think either they need to actually just try to create a movie in which the kaiju are the main characters and there are some human characters that serve to sort of explain for the audience what's going on or provide some additional emotional content, or they need to write better human plots. But because at least from watching some of the classic kaiju films with you, Josh, I do think that for me at least, the kaiju are often the principal characters, especially because they're the ones that typically continue from movie to movie. But there are obvious exceptions where it's human characters that continue from movie to movie as well, and writers have done a really good job working that in. So hopefully they can instead achieve that union of both and make a masterpiece in which there are continuing characters that we invest in, that we care about, and that don't have obvious plot holes, in addition to these kaiju characters and their lives and their fights.
It's like one we haven't watched together is Godzilla against MechaGodzilla, which is, you have single dad with a kid, and the pilot for MechaGodzilla is a complex female character, and it works great. And it's just like, okay. And they didn't continue that. So like, come on, guys. Like this was good. So we know it can be done.
Yeah.
And the part of the requirement is don't have a softball team full of characters, have three. So if it's like three human characters in the Hollow Earth, and Kong talking to the little girl with sign language, like that works. Like that could totally work, because again, it's it's not insane in size at that point, and it's people that you can relate to and see the challenge for whatever it is. So, but that said, this did make me happy, despite the fact I have some very big issues with it. But, seeing Kong with I mean, I did get the action figure.
Oh, nice.
It's just, and he does have the nice axe. So it's like, rock on. I do like Old Man Kong, who had to pop his shoulder back in. Like I'm on board. So with that, everyone stay tuned for more. I can't give more details, but Nari and I will be back for San Diego Comic-Con virtually. And that's all I can say about that. And we have some other adventures upcoming. So everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky.